Hi. Hello. I'm going to be talking to you about two themes which ostensibly seem a long way apart. One is the future of education in this country, and in particular the future of higher education and the future and a vision for universities just like this one. And the second thing I'm going to be talking about is the future of distress. And by distress, some of you may call that mental illness. I prefer mental distress. I'm going to be talking about how we, as a country, address mental health. I think you'll probably agree with me that both of those themes have faced their challenges in recent times. I think that the ways forward to address both education, higher education, and mental health are linked. So that's the link, and I'm going to try and persuade you that there is a link. I'm going to start with a quotation given by the great poet and little red poet John Masefield almost 70 years ago, not exactly on the edge of tomorrow, at an event, at an important ceremony at my university. And Masefield describes what a university should be. Now, I don't fully agree with Masefield with what he says here, but there are ideas here that are important. I've underlined them. And the theme that I think Masefield is in part addressing in this piece is the way in which it is critical for universities to be porous entities, not to be sealed off from the worlds in which they sit, not to be sealed off from their neighborhoods, from their communities, and from their cities. And let's just look at the first few lines. I'm not going to read all this out of Masefield's text. There are few earthly things more splendid than a university, he begins. In these days of broken frontiers and collapsing values, when the dams are down and the floods are making misery, when every future looks somewhat grim and every ancient foothold has become something of a quagmire, wherever a university stands, it stands and shines. What a vision. 1946, just think about what was going on then. The challenges and uncertainties of that time. And let's think too about the challenges and uncertainties that we live in right now. Universities, I think, are undergoing a crisis of identity, in part. And I want to lay out a vision for higher education, a broad, idealistic, utopian, some would say old-fashioned vision for what universities are and should be, a vision which goes against the grain, which is not reactive, which doesn't just roll over and respond to market pressures, which refuses to finish our thoughts with the conclusion that students are consumers. I want to kind of trace out a bigger, more generous and more important vision. And what I want to say, drawing on the likes of Ernest Boyer and John Dewey, is that we need to articulate an idea that education, not just education in universities, education is a way of living. It is a way of being. And universities can articulate that vision if we choose to. We certainly need, in my view, to inhabit that vision. In this view, drawing on thinkers like Boyer, but actually going back to the ancient Greeks, education is not just a way of obtaining the necessary knowledge and qualifications to get yourself a job. Education is a vital, critical resource for social progress and reform. Indeed, education is critical in these thinkers' minds to the nourishing of democratic, free societies. Democracy here is conceived as the good life, as a means by which citizens strive for the good of their fellow citizens. And I want to think about citizenship here in a global sense, and the academy as something dedicated to the renewal of society. So in this view, education, yes, is about the acquiring of subject knowledge, absolutely critical. It is about individual good. It is about social mobility, as Crystal so beautifully articulated. And it is also about learning what citizenship is. It's learning to value and have a stake in communities and society. It's understanding the vital role for a healthy democracy of being able to critically engage with ideas and contemporary issues. Above all, for me, it's about partnership, teams, and communities. Ultimately, education, scholarship, is about the transformation of the world, an attempt to transform reality, to make life better for ourselves and crucially for others, to work for change. Now, practically, in universities, what does this mean? Well, it poses challenges to us, those of us who teach, like me, who are educators. It poses challenges to those who manage institutions like this in their mission statements. In terms of teaching, we need to be working with our students collaboratively, forming communities of learning, honing the skills of inquiry and critical reflection. And for me, above all, we need to provide opportunities for students to learn alongside, with, and from communities and organizations outside the walls of the academy. And an example of this, which is a project that I oversee in Sheffield, is called Engaged Learning. And a couple of quick slides. So our Engaged Learning modules and courses, as it says, they combine traditional academic work with opportunities for students to learn with and from external partners, real-world challenges and experiences outside the university, with these learning activities usually focused on issues of public concern. In Sheffield, many of our Engaged Learning projects focus on issues of inequality, social marginalization, and exclusion. And I see this kind of work as intimately connected to ideas concerning citizenship and social responsibility. And I'm really delighted to know that under Rafe's leadership, this university is developing ideas for similar work. I've worked in this area myself a great deal, and I'll mention some of what I've done later on. These are some of the kinds of projects that we work with on students, like we work with young people in schools who are struggling to read. We work in dementia education, mental health, with refugees and asylum seekers. And all of this activity is predicated not on the notion that universities might dispense their beneficence to benighted communities. Far from it. In my view, knowledge is multiply located. It doesn't just live in places like this. It's out there too, in communities, all kinds of knowledge, different kinds of knowledge. And to equip our students for the worlds in which they will work, for the worlds in which they will take their place as hopefully active, concerned citizens, it's vital for us to provide access not just to our libraries, but also to that citizen knowledge. Okay, that's the bit about universities. And now, mental health. Now, I don't know how many of you know that there are such things in this country as recovery colleges, but there are. There's quite a lot. Most of them are owned by NHS trusts with responsibility for mental illness, learning disabilities, and the like. It's a movement that's been going probably for about 10 years now, and it's predicated on a notion that instead of being service users, people are students. They sign up to a recovery college and they might take courses in, for instance, learning to manage my bipolar disorder, how to stay active when my depression is bad, how to manage hostile voices in my head, how to manage on a budget if you're on disability benefits, those kind of courses. If you look at the prospectuses, on the whole, that's what they will provide. Now, recovery colleges emerged from the recovery movement. And the principles of recovery were formulated by mental health activists. They weren't formulated by clinicians or academics. They were formulated in the 60s and 70s by mental health activists in the States. People living with mental illness who decided that instead of spending the rest of their lives hoping that one day the symptoms would go away, people would start building the lives that they wanted to have right now. I think these principles are great, but as with so many good, energetic ideas, their implementation has become somewhat stale. Some of that energy seems to have been chewed up as initial activity gets passed through corporate sieves. And as I said, the courses that recovery colleges offer these days are often very focused on symptom reduction, on coping. There isn't so much of that energy to have a life now rather than whenever I get better. And the problem with this is that it locks people in to narratives in which they're defined by what they can't do rather than by what they can. And it's not an easy place to get out of when you're kind of locked into this story and you're so used to defining yourself in terms of difficulty, lack, dysfunction, when you're very unused to speaking about what you love, what you hope for, what you think about the politics of the day, how you might contribute, how you might mount a campaign, what you care about. It's a very, very different focus. So, what would it be like, I wonder, if we brought some of that energy from those ideas about radical pedagogy, critical educational ideas into the recovery college movement? Well, this is something we're trying to do in Sheffield at the moment. So I have lots of different hats. I'm also a director of a mental health charity as well as working for the NHS, and we're beginning to try and do this. So watch this space. What about if we actually help people to enlarge their imagination, to develop their critical skills? What about if we drew on the expertise that people already have? The expertise of living with a mental illness, but also their expertise in whatever their life has led to at this moment. What about if our educational offers were about empowerment and participation and citizenship and the strengthening of criticality, the discovery of hope and talent and community? What if that was what was going on in recovery colleges? And what if they were open to everybody? You don't actually have to have a diagnosis of mental illness. What if you were unemployed or lonely or old and isolated? What about opening up recovery colleges? And where might universities fit within this? Well, I think universities do have a place. And in fact, universities already are beginning to make moves in this direction. Certainly mine has. I'd like to see a course for undergraduates. Let's say it's on the tragedies of Shakespeare, in which for the first 6 weeks of the teaching term, I know nothing about Shakespeare, but let's just pretend I do, that I teach them about the tragedies of Shakespeare and how to teach the tragedies of Shakespeare. And then the students put on a course in a recovery college, open and free to anybody who wants to come and find out about the tragedies of Shakespeare. Well, something very like that's actually happening in Sheffield now, run by a colleague of mine, and it's been going now for about 2 years. I think our universities are full of untapped potential. Every year in Sheffield and Leeds, all these generally young and energetic people arrive, wanting to learn, wanting to develop personally, and this would be an opportunity to add to those we already offer. These are pictures from some of the student projects that I've been involved with, and you can see there students working alongside citizens in the classroom. And a lot of those projects come under the banner of the Storying Sheffield initiative. You can Google it and find out more about it. Storying Sheffield actually has always worked primarily with people with long-term mental health issues. And we have many different projects in which students take a leading role, working alongside citizens from the community, learning from citizens, and also assisting citizens within university settings or community settings. A relatively new project we've started is called the Narrative Masterclass, where people with mental health difficulties teach medical students who want to be psychiatrists about living with a mental health condition. And this is an amazing project. I kind of oversee it, but it's entirely designed and run by people who are not connected with the university and have long-term experience of mental health conditions. And that's a picture from one of them. And you can go on the website and find out more about it. And one last example I'd like to mention of the kind of work that's going on is very near here at York St John University, their Converge program. Again, you can have a look at that. Nick Rowe, the director of the Converge program at York St John, is a remarkable individual who's doing amazing things there. So I'll just finish by saying that I'm really interested in the agenda I've been laying out to you. And we're beginning to try and build it in Sheffield over the next 2 or 3 years. Hopefully you'll see something emerge. I'm interested in the issues I've been talking to you about because I'm an educator, I'm a teacher, I work in mental health, I oversee the Engaged Learning Project. I'm really interested in what inequality does to a society, and northern universities like Leeds and Sheffield, comparatively speaking, are centres of great affluence compared to some of the areas around them. I'm also interested because I've, believe it or not, I'm now in my 50s, late 50s actually. I know that's probably a shock to a lot of you. But I've now lived for over 40 years with serious mental illness myself. I'm a professor with no A-levels and only a couple of GCSEs. And between the ages of 16 and 35, I was usually so psychiatrically disabled that I couldn't work. I was in and out of hospitals, homeless. And what was it that helped me start to build my life after what had been a period of, well, great and considerable difficulty? I wouldn't want to put it down to one thing, but probably a very significant thing was signing on to an access course at the University of Sheffield. And for 2 nights a week, I think it was, I'd turn up and learn about social science and history and maths and goodness knows what else with a mixed group of people. A right ragbag we were. And somehow, through that, I discovered that I did have something to offer the world, that I was able to form meaningful relationships with people, that had talent, such as it is, but I had something. And I enjoyed it too. I enjoyed learning. Learning is a wonderful, wonderful thing. Suddenly, the world began to open up before me. And I wouldn't want to put myself up as any sort of example. I've had a lot of advantages in life which others haven't. And things are very, very difficult at the moment for people with mental health problems. I wouldn't want to put my own recovery, such as it is, because I still live with mental illness today, down to just education. One of the things that probably helped me before that was I'd got a secure place to live. I can see the lady at the back waving. Things are hard now. But I think probably one of the reasons that I'm energetically invested in this agenda is as much to do with my own story as my reading of the academic literature. So thanks for listening.